Well, I tried to think up a catchy name for this Facebook Live, but child safety with dogs, well, seems to get the job done. So let me give you a couple of things to think about right from the start. Did you know that the majority of dog bites, to children in particular, occur because the dog was afraid? Yeah, even of a little rascal, just like this tall. Dogs can freak out because they believe, and they may have reason to believe, that they've been backed into a corner. That's a big thing that we're going to touch on throughout this little lesson on how to keep children safe. And so rather than approaching a dog, a child can actually lure that dog to them. So the dog chooses to come for a reinforcer like food. We'll talk about that too. And one thing that you might not ever suspect, because, child safety, it's full of emotion. We need to put some logic to it and apply some research. But, we're pretty protective of our kids, and even if they're not our children, sometimes even more so. And so, what if the pet is sick, not feeling well, painful? That's a big factor in a lot of cases. And what about verbal reprimands or even punishment, physical punishment? Should we do that? Does that make a difference? We'll talk about all that stuff. And by the way, in case we've never met, if we've never been formally introduced, I'm Dr. Jeff Nickel. I'm a veterinarian, and I'm residency trained in behavior medicine of animals after many years in general medicine. So there's not much I haven't seen or been trained in. And it's so easy to get frustrated, even angry with a pet who behaves aggressively toward a child. But let's step back and look at some of the realities and some of the research. And by the way, if you find this helpful, don't hesitate to hit that wow button or make some hearts come across the screen. And if you have friends or family members who could use this kind of information, don't hesitate to tag them so they can take it in too. I do these Facebook Lives, by the way, to bring out the best in pets and their people. And that can be especially important when we're talking about risks to children. So, what about kids? I mean, we all started out that way, didn't we? Did you ever do dumb things when you were a kid? Oh, I never did. Well, actually, I did. I did a lot of dumb stuff when I was a kid. In fact, one thing that ended up getting me bitten on the face when I was 4 years old by a Boston Terrier. I mean, these things happen. I had pursued that cute little dog under the card table where my folks and we were visiting their family, and my friend Kenny Graham's parents, they were playing gin rummy, I think, and they had this beautiful Boston Terrier under their table. And I was going to hug and kiss that little dog because I love dogs, and we didn't have one. Well, of course, he felt backed into a corner, and nobody knew that could happen, including me. Boy, what a rude surprise I got. Got a couple of stitches in the corner of my lip. So, what happens? Well, let me tell you about a study that was done at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia of dog bites to kids, and they found that in 60% of those cases, an adult was present when it happened. Well, how does that work? I mean, weren't they paying attention? Well, I've talked to these families because aggression is the biggest part of every veterinary behavior specialty practice. Mine's no different. And what we find is that the parents were there, and in almost every case, they were watching. They just didn't know what to look for. Or misinterpreted the pet's body signaling. So let's talk about that a little bit too. Let's not put the blame on the pet, but put the responsibility on the adult to teach the child what to do to bring out the best in that pet instead of triggering fear, which, most kids aren't going to try to do that. They just don't know any better. So, let me tell you a story. This really happened. I don't make this stuff up. This is a story about a little girl named Amber, and she was all of about 6 months old, 7 months, starting to walk, actually crawl, walk, both at the same time. And this excellent family, and I got to know them a little bit because I did follow-ups with them, and I worked with them closely and even made a house call to really help them figure this out. But the very most information I got to really understand what was going on in this home was a video that they'd shot. And in this video, we've got Duke, big dog, a boxer. I mean, these are nice dogs typically. And he had a wire crate in their living room, nice fluffy pad in there, and it was his own little safe haven. He considered it a den, although it would have been more like a den had they covered it with a sheet or a towel. But it was open, it was a wire crate. And he's in there trying to stay safe because little Amber was scaring the daylights out of him. Well, how's that possible? I mean, this is a little girl, for goodness sake, and she meant no harm. Well, the dog has his own private logic too, and he was not raised with little kids. He didn't understand them. They do unpredictable things. I mean, let's face it, kids yell or shriek or do a somersault or throw something, unlike us adults who usually, if we walk toward the door, we're probably going to open it and go through, but a kid, you never know. And this dog was nervous. And she crawled into that crate with him, and he had all the body signaling that people like I am trained to recognize. He was licking his lips. He was looking away, but when he did, he kept his eyes on that scary child, and he gave what we call a whale eye, a crescent moon shape of the white part of the eye that showed that he was looking away to show that he was deferential to this little human, but couldn't take his eyes off her because, well, what if she did something really scary? Well, she did, of course. She crawled into his crate, and he had no way to get out. So here he is leaning back, looking away with that whale eye, licking his lips, ears back, yawning, didn't know what he needed to do. All right, well, they came into the consultation with that video, but here's why they called my office. Here the family was, and they're in the living room, and they've got their couch, and it was sort of situated into a corner, and of course I know about that because I've been to their house. And he's nestled up against the couch next to his adult people, and here comes little Amber, and she's just going right for him. She's going to give him that big hug, just like I was going to do with that little pushed-in-face Boston Terrier when I was 4 years old. And he didn't know what to do. They didn't realize that. And as she dives for him, she hugs him, and she turns around and sits on him, jumps up and down on his chest a few times, and then pounds on him with her little fists, and I think they probably thought that was kind of entertaining. And boy, didn't Duke. He didn't. He lunged for her, and he hit her with his face, and then jumped over her and took off. Well, he growled as he did all this, and they immediately believed that little girl had been bitten on the face, so they called urgent care and raced over there, and they had told the staff that their little girl had been bitten in the face by their dog. Well, when they got there, of course, the staff was pretty nervous about what was about to come through the door, and the doctor and the staff were right out there, and they brought her and put her on the exam table under a bright exam light, and there wasn't a mark on the little girl because, well, she hadn't been bitten at all. But she could have been. And what that dog had done was given her canine-specific body signaling as she approached and was scaring the daylights out of him. And of course, she didn't know how to read that communication from a dog, and her folks didn't either. And so he raised it to a higher level, verbal, which dogs frankly seldom use. He growled, and he stabbed her with his nose and then escaped. He jumped over her and took off. And you think, why would a great big dog, 60, 70 pounds, how could he possibly have anything to be afraid of a little human a third his size, far slower, with no athletic ability compared with him? And how could he be so freaked out? Don't apply human logic to this thing. He was freaked out. Remember that the great majority of injuries to children are from dogs who were scared. Defensive aggressive. That's the reality we live with. So what's our takeaway from this? Well, let me tell you what I taught Amber's folks. I said, in your living room where there is no area where Duke can feel trapped, including in his crate or the corner where that couch was, have a spot where you put a little piece of tape on the floor, and that's where Amber squats. And by squatting, and toddlers are pretty good little squatters, They have good knees, and that's where she was going to stay. And she knew that because she had her special spot on the floor. And there's Duke. He's about 6 feet away, and her job was to entice him to come to her. Now, kids love cause and effect, and as soon as they can talk, they want their dog to do what they tell them. And dogs, by their nature, by the way, are naturally deferential to people of any age. And they equipped that little girl with a treat bag of her own. And just like Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show, she only got one treat at a time. Okay? Barney got one bullet, by the way. So she had one treat in her pocket, in her treat bag. And her job was to squat on that little spot and offer the treat to Duke and call his name and tell him to come, which of course he did immediately, and he took the treat. Well, these training sessions need to be short, 3 or 4 minutes. That's about all the attention span you have with a child. It's about the same with a dog. And then she was to turn and go the other way. And every single time they did that, just twice a day, that dog learned that that little girl was a treat dispenser, and all he had to do was follow her instructions, and he would get reinforced immediately every single time. Well, that's the way it's supposed to work with dogs. Their job, by the way, is to look to all humans as leaders, opportunities to earn resources like food, because dogs, of course, are hardwired for scarcity. They're sure that the Great Famine is coming in about 20 minutes, but they don't get it for nothing. All has to be earned from a leader, and we wanted Duke to begin regarding that little pint-sized person as one of his leaders, and he was quick to catch on. Now, this isn't to say that all dogs are trustworthy like that, but nearly all of them are. And so your job as the protector of the child, as the teacher of empathy and of interpersonal skills, you can lure a lot of people and build relationships with creatures of all species by giving them a reinforcer, a reason to be your friend. And that little girl started learning that from her dog. And so what she needed to do was to never approach that dog, but teach him to come to her. Well, she caught on right away, and so did Duke. And so if you're going to decide whether you've got a dog who's amenable to that kind of thing, watch the dog's body signaling. And if you see that dog show no interest in that child, or approach the child with its ears back and its lip raised, that's a dog who has no business being near kids. But if that dog is happy to come, and we're going to talk about cats next week, by the way, with children. If that dog is happy to come, I have an upside-down border collie here, because it gets to work for food, for reinforcers. You've got something to work with on that thing. I was just 8 years old when I decided to be a veterinarian, and it was the behavior of these creatures that actually got me interested in the first place. And I speak not just as a veterinarian and as one who's specially trained in behavior medicine of animals, but I'm a father too. Well, look, there's my family. Those two little boys, they're in their mid-20s now. And you can tell I don't look like Groucho Marx anymore. My big mustache was in style back then, in the mid-90s, late 90s, I guess. Anyway, at least I thought it was. So pets, children, if you're going to have a puppy, by the way, you want to socialize that little rascal to every type of creature he or she's ever going to encounter. And the sensitive period in the developmental stages of that immature canine brain are best recognized between 5 and 12 weeks. In other words, if you've got a puppy, you want to take it to puppy kindergarten class. As long as those vaccines are kept current, they're very safe, and have that puppy visit with children, with older people, men, women, people of different races, so that that puppy's developing brain takes those things in and becomes part of the hardwiring of what's going on upstairs, so that that dog knows that, people are good and they're not scary, and that will make a difference. So I have a question here from Julia Chavez. Well, hello, Julia. I love how the animals congregate around you. Actually, they're my pets, and by the way, the cats are lured with food, Julia. But of course, Miss America here, she earns food all the time and other good things. And by the way, the most potent reinforcer for almost all dogs, food being second, by the way, the most potent reinforcer is petting. So this excellent border collie of the Nickel family is here. She gets petted when she sits with me, and it works very well for her. So, so what about the punishment thing? It's so hard to resist yelling or taking a swing at a dog who has just put your child's life at risk, or even has hurt your child. But if you do that, what you're going to do is teach that dog to associate an even higher level of fear and agitation with being near children. So the last thing you want to do is react. The thing you have to do is take that dog away from the children. And by the way, a great way of controlling a pet, a dog in particular, around children, is to leave a leash attached to the dog's collar all the time when the kids are around. We'll call it a drag line because the dog's dragging it around. And so if that dog is within your arm's reach when those children are nearby, then you have the opportunity to do as you must if you need to create distance. But the leash, the drag line, is the simplest and best way. Let's say the dog is already getting agitated, and maybe the dog has arthritis or chronic nausea that you weren't aware of because it's getting older, and you didn't see these changes coming, and all of a sudden this dog is starting to behave badly with kids. That dog needs to see its veterinarian. But anytime you've got a dog near children, I would have that leash attached to the dog's collar, that drag line that the dog drags around. And so if you start getting nervous, you're not going to yell and potentially trigger agitation for the pet. You're not going to lose control of yourself. You're going to grab that leash and create distance. Now, gentlemen, and I use that term loosely with these cats, we'll get a little bit of Gaston. Naughty cats. Whose are they anyway? So use a leash and be proactive and be realistic. You know, we have a great deal of research in behavior, and it's a rapidly growing body of information. But we also know that sometimes things happen that we didn't see coming. So be watchful, and in fact, if you're at all concerned about your dog's reliability around kids, then limit the exposures and set that child up for success right away. Don't wait until you might have a problem. Teach the child right away, as soon as they get mobile, that they can get that dog to do what they want, just by offering the dog a reinforcer for coming when called. And I have another question, I think. Yes, Deborah, how do I introduce an adult dog and cat for the first time? I'm scared he will eat my cat. There's reason to be concerned about that possibility in some cases. And so what I'm going to suggest is that you, to this drag line I was just talking about, this leash, if you have the dog with you and you're just being very quiet, you're not interacting with the dog, but you have that leash in your hand with the handle of the leash hooked around your thumb and in your fist, so it's good and secure, and then have the cat quietly enter the room. What I would advise against is leading the dog to the cat or putting them together in the same room and hoping everything works out. The trouble with houses, by the way, and I live in a house, this is in my house, is that we're not setting every pet up for success by confining them to a structure with walls, because their little brains are not hardwired for understanding a building. They are structured by behavioral evolution to live in the wild with a territory, but it's got a scent boundary for cats and dogs, and they can leave it, they can create all the distance they need to whenever they need to, which, you know, back to the child thing and the story of Duke and Amber, you know, whether he was in his crate or whether he was against that couch inside a house, he knew that that little scary monster, he couldn't create all the distance that he needed to. He was very limited and so felt easily trapped. So, you know, if you do this outside, any kind of anxiety that most pets have is going to be lessened by simply having more space around them. So if you do it indoors, and that is a controlled situation, do it in the biggest room in your house, and sit quietly, and your dog is with you, and you have that leash 6 foot, no longer, and let the cat come in. And if the dog lunges, do not reprimand, simply get up and create distance. It is possible that you don't have any business having a cat live with your dog, but very often if the cat is willing to come into the room and you can have food in your treat bag and give your dogs, yes, I'm not wearing a treat bag, but you saw me reach for that little spot on my right hip, didn't you, little girlfriend? You can offer your dog food in exchange for working for you, and if the dog works for you and earns food reinforcers and petting and verbal praise, the big three, with the cat nearby, twice daily sessions, only 3 to 4 minutes each, your dog can learn that good things always happen when that cat shows up. And in fact, you can motivate your dog a little bit more by withholding food for several hours before these set up meet and greets from a distance. And you can, the cat's at a distance, and you can withhold attention from your dog for several hours first. And dogs are highly bonded to us, and if they don't have any interaction with you for several hours and no food, and then here comes the cat, and suddenly this dog can earn interactions and food reinforcers, and here's the cat. After several sessions, the dog starts putting this association together. It's like, if I pay attention to my leader and do as I'm told, then I can earn good things. What we're doing in the case of your cat, or teaching your dog to associate great things with being with children, is we're using what's hardwired into their brains. And so often people make the mistake of trying to speak human to a member of a different species, and they get frustrated because it doesn't work. Well, there's a lot that our cats and dogs have in common with us, which is what makes them such great pets. There are some species that don't work out as great pets, like skunks and raccoons and snakes and other reptiles really don't belong as pets. But cats and dogs do. But we've got to use what they already understand. So they earn things from us in low stress situations, very low stress. If your dog is getting agitated, then it's too close to the cat. If the cat is getting freaked out and panicking, then things are too close. If you take it super, super slow, you may find that your dog and cat do great together, but it's a process. If you have another question, you're welcome to send it to me on my Facebook page. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you'll go to my website, which is drjeffnicol.com, drjeffnicol.com, and you'll be invited to subscribe, which costs nothing. And if you do, every Tuesday morning in your email box, you will get my Facebook Live, in case you weren't able to tune in, and my weekly blog, which is published in the Albuquerque Journal every Friday. You'll get it on Tuesday. And you'll also, just for signing up, you'll get my at-home pet first aid and CPR guide. And of course, it's all at no charge. So I hope you'll do that, and I'd love to see you every week or every time you can show up. And you're welcome, Deborah. You give it a try, and if you have problems, let me know. And so, Miss America, along with 2 cats who've drifted off because they're cats and that's what they do, and Miss America, here, sit up and say goodnight to our friends. Have a nice evening and a great weekend. I'm going fishing, fly fishing and backpacking in the next few days up in northern New Mexico. I'll see you folks next Thursday, which I believe will be the 22nd. It'll be my birthday, actually. And we're going to talk about child safety with cats next week. And Gaston and Tony, the 2 guys who had been on the table, will be with us. And Miss America will be here for comic relief as well. So I hope to see you then. Have a great evening.